All right, so we're here and we're picking up a little bit with research methods that are unique to policing. So if you kind of had a note, so these are research method issues in policing. So immediately what we find out is that I like drawing on a board. I don't have a board in this online class. I like the bright colors. And I write in cursive. So if you can't read cursive, well, I'm sorry. This is how I write. So let's talk a little bit. So this is not going to be a review of each and every method. A lot of those things are, already in the text. So we're just going to limit this discussion to specific issues. So we'll talk one like a little bit more. Is this issue of sampling. So when we think about sampling, right, what do we know about it, right? So this is a way to get a number of subjects into a study. So we want, to get people enrolled, right? So if we're studying police agencies, we want to study police departments. And the reason why we end up sampling, right, is that we take this, subsection of all agencies. So we take this subsection, and what we try to do is to use the subsection to infer to the greater population right? In this case, it's going to be like all agencies in the United States, or perhaps all police agencies in the world, right? And typically, the preferred method, if at all possible, is to get a random sample, right? So if there is no, bias in the sense of like there's a pattern, or if there is no, direct selection of it, right? That way, if we have something random, we can, just like kind of like say like, well, because like, anyone could have been selected. It is true then that the results that we see can be extended to the main population, right? Which may or may not be true, right? But that's what we attempt to do with sampling. So why is this issue like important in the study of policing, right? Or what kinds of issues come up, right? So the first issue is that there are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the U.S. So what this tells us is that if we wanted to know really anything about policing in general, right, we would have to take a sample, right? There are far too many agencies to study, right? So there's too many to sample them all, or to study them all, right? So we really can't do it. It's not practical from a cost thing. If we want to deliver a survey or an attitude, or if we want to know more about like the methods that were being used or their tactics or things like that, we're really going to reach the situation where it becomes really difficult to do that, right? Or if we want to study the effects of a some sort of new intervention, right? It's going to be really difficult to do just because there are too many, right? We can't sample them all. Another issue that we should be kind of aware of, at least as far as policing is concerned, is that because police are not always wanting to participate, or they are suspicious of outsiders, or so let's say that I had a new police tactic that I think was really going to work. I had this great theory, maybe some data to back it up. It's not always going to be like an agency is not going to be like, oh yeah, sure, we'd love to do your study, right? So why is that the case, right? So we know that there are political concerns. So let's say I had something where I was like, I think this is going to reduce crime in your neighborhood, right? A police department is going to be measured and evaluated by how well they effectively commit crime, right? And that is something that a lot of like mayoral campaigns and state legislatures, and as well as like House of Representatives run on, is crime reduction is like an issue. We want to be tough on crime. So if you come up with this new idea, that's fantastic. But if it doesn't work, there are severe political ramifications that are really in place, right? So it's not always, something that like an agency, wants to do to begin with. The other part too is that there is a cost aspect. So agency, first and foremost, police departments have to protect their community and allocate resources, in terms of violence, in terms of attacking drugs, and they have their own set of priorities that they focus on. So if you're asking them to do something new, and it's going to take police resources, or they have to reallocate officers, or there's a new shift that has to be created, or whatever, then they don't have the money to pay for the extra shifts, or they have to pay the money to hire the new officers. If it's a new training program, they don't have the money to develop it. So if they don't have the money and you don't have the money, then this is usually not going to be a good study. So it's a way that you kind of limit the influence about what you're trying to do, right? So it's really really difficult to do that. Another part that is probably unique is that when we study American police, so U.S. police, there is no centralized body. And because we have 18,000 different agencies, right, it's highly fragmentized. There's a lot of agencies in the United States, and they each do their own things differently. At the state level, there could be some uniformity in terms of training, in terms of expectations, but largely they work at the local level. And even though what changes that may exist at the state level changes from state to state, right? There are different priorities for agencies that focus at the really local level, and those are going to be different from the county kind of level, and they're going to be different from the state police departments, right? So unlike, say, French police, where there is basically the city police and there's the country police, or if you look at Australia, where they have police departments based off of their states, the state being Queensland is a state. I think it's New South Wales is another one, right? Those are two states. They only have 8 police departments. England has 40. What this means is that there is a ton of variety in agencies where we really, can't, really generalize, right? It's hard to generalize when everything is so different. Each have their own missions, each have their own different statements, they have their own training. They have their own equipment issues and so on, right? They have their own technological capabilities. They have unique crime problems that are in it. So there's not a lot of unification. So what may work in one part of the country is going to be very different from another. Another way to think about it, right, is that if you think about the police in LA versus New York, LA probably doesn't care about crime on the subway because no one uses the subway in LA. Whereas in New York, everyone uses the subway, so they have a very unique, different thing. So their transit police are going to probably act and behave very differently than they would in a different part of the country. So there's a lot. What this means basically is that there is a lot of contextual factors that come into play. So the core lesson then, right, out of this, right, is that it's really hard to find agencies that want to participate. There's a lot of issues about why they're going to be less reluctant to do so. So what ends up happening as a result of this is that most research studies are going to lead to a very small number of departments. Now, this doesn't mean that the research is inherently poor. So even though you may only study one agency, the study itself may be designed very well, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean the research is bad, but what this does mean is that there are hard limits on the external validity of any policing study. And it is not uncommon to only study one agency, or maybe 3. 10 is whoa. Anything more than 10 is pretty fantastic, right? In most cases, especially if you want to collect data over time, right? It is it is like a wow factor if you get like really more than 3, right? Anything more than that, just because it's so hard to have agency participation with anything, right? So, because of all these other factors that come in, right? So what this means, though, the other part too is that there are very different populations, right? Like if you went to, like someplace in Nebraska, right? Probably chances are like place in Nebraska is going to have a very high white population, limited ethnic minority population. You go to LA or New York or Dallas or wherever, like a very different population in the sense that there are more, Hispanic, Latinx people. There are more people from the Pacific Islands. There are people who are African American, Black, Caribbean American, right? Like they have a different, makeup of it. They have different histories with maybe segregation in it, different histories with their police powers and abuses and things like that, right? So the main point, out of this, right, is that limited number of agencies. So, it's not necessarily that researchers don't want to work with more agencies, they do, but it's an issue in the sense that because it's very uncommon to do that, because there's a lot of, like issues related to, we have very limited external validity, and we understand the context is different. So whenever we want to sample or study a police problem, right? So let's say if we developed a police program that we want to try, or police new experiment. So any study of a program or, policing a police measure or something like that has to be feasible. So when you're writing, like a proposal for a thesis or some other research product or a comprehensive exam, it has to be feasible, right? So if you want to run, a randomized control trial, you probably cannot do that with more than like 3 agencies, right? You probably cannot, because it's just simply not practical or feasible, right? If you were, looking at 15,000 agencies, like that is impossible. Like there's no way you could possibly do that. So when you write or you think about these kinds of issues, you have to ground it in reality. So that is an important note, is that any study has to be grounded in reality, in the feasibility of the study, and what you can and cannot do, right? All right, so we'll end this video here, and we'll pick up with the next set of topics. Hopefully that was useful, and if not, well, I'm sorry for wasting your time. But until next time I'll see you guys later.